The rain had stopped, but the smell of ozone and the metallic tang of blood still clung to the air. My scrubs were gone, replaced by a simple, expensive silk robe. I was alive, and that was the problem. I woke in a room that felt like a sterile cage, all concrete, glass, and silence. No windows I could reach, just a single, steel door and the constant awareness that I was no longer in my small Osaka apartment. I was in a high-tech fortress, a mausoleum of quiet power. I was a hostage, not a guest. But I wasn't captured. I was claimed. A tall, impeccably dressed man entered. He was the one with the crimson dragon tattoo, the one who had been bleeding out from a bullet to the shoulder just hours ago. He was Ryu Nakamura, the Oyabun, the supreme boss of the Nakamura-gumi Yakuza. He didn't look like a killer. He looked like a statue carved from ice. He didn't smile. He never did. "You saved my life, Zara Thompson," he stated in flawless, chilling English. In our world, that act is called inochi no on, the debt of life. It is unpayable. You are no longer just a nurse. You are our life, and your life now belongs to this clan. You are property, protector, and prize. His words were a cold, calculated decree, a legal document signed in blood I hadn't even spilled. He didn't ask. He simply stated my fate. I belonged to him. I opened my mouth to argue, to invoke the police, the embassy, the law, but before I could make a sound, the door slammed open with an explosive force that shattered the serene silence. The second man entered, radiating heat and chaos. It was the one with the black tiger tattoo, Hyun-woo Choi, the charismatic, volatile underboss of the rival Korean Mafia. He wore a custom suit, but his eyes were pure wildfire, and his accent was thick with raw energy. "Ani," Hyun-woo scoffed, addressing Ryu. "You forget, Oyabun. I was there too, and she saved my life as well." He strode across the room, ignoring the tension, stopping right in front of me. He reached out and touched my jaw, a bold, possessive, electric claim. "In my world, Jagi," he purred, using a Korean term of endearment. "It's Hyo-a-bin, blood debt. You spilled your sweat and your skill to keep my blood inside me. You're part of my bloodline now. And you know what that means?" He glanced at Ryu, a defiant, reckless grin splitting his face. "It means she's mine, too." The room was instantly a bomb ready to detonate. Two rival crime lords, two ancient cultural laws, one woman, me. I was the center of a geopolitical mafia standoff, all because I chose compassion over common sense. Ryu's hand went to the hidden weapon on his belt. Hyun-woo's eyes narrowed into slits of danger. The only thing they agreed on was that I was theirs. And that's where the true story begins. I know this is a messy, complicated, and maybe even a dark place to start, but the story is just starting, and you won't believe the ride ahead. Think about this. Two men, two clans, both claiming one woman's life. Do you think Zara deserves to be stripped of her life like this, just for being kind? Drop a comment below and tell me if she should run or stay and fight. And look, I put all this work into bringing you this story, but I see a lot of you haven't subscribed yet. I'm literally sacrificing my sleep to bring you the next chapter of Zara's blood debt. If you truly want to see how she escapes, or if she ever sees her family again, you need to hit that subscribe button right now. Don't leave her hanging. Ryu finally broke the silence, his voice low, cold, and absolute. "So what happens now?" I whispered. Ryu gave a cold smile. "Now, we decide who you belong to." The argument that followed was conducted in 3 languages, English, Japanese, and Korean. But the underlying message was universal: ownership. Ryu Nakamura, the Ice King, stood rigidly, his crimson dragon visible beneath his silk shirt, demanding adherence to the Yakuza's inochi no on. Hyun-woo Choi, the Wildfire, paced, challenging every word with reckless Korean fervor, over his Hyun-woo bin. They were two apex predators, fighting over a prize they both refused to surrender. And I was the trophy. "We have a territorial conflict," Ryu stated, his voice clipping the air. "Her presence here is a statement. She is Nakamura Gumi property." "She saved my life half a street away," Hyun-woo countered, flashing that dangerous wolfish grin. "And a Japanese oyabun can't claim a Korean debt. She belongs in Seoul." After 30 agonizing minutes of veiled threats and impossible cultural demands, a bitter compromise was forged, a shared custody agreement worthy of international organized crime. I would split my time between their two domains, beginning with Ryu's. A sleek, armored Bentley transported me from the sterile safe house to the official Nakamura compound, a place that wasn't just a home, but a declaration. It was nestled deep in the hills outside Tokyo, a minimalist fortress of dark wood, unforgiving steel, and glass walls that stared out over the vast, cold city. It smelled of polished stone, old money, and absolute discipline. Every movement, every silence, felt choreographed. I was no longer a nurse, but an asset in a meticulously maintained exhibit. The guards wore identical black suits, their faces devoid of expression. Unlike Hyun-woo's men, who reeked of adrenaline and reckless loyalty, Ryu's people were shadows, efficient and terrifying in their quiet obedience. Ryu led me through the stark corridors to my new quarters. It was luxurious but soulless, a space built for surveillance, not comfort. "You will learn to survive here, Zara-san," he said, the use of the Japanese honorific making the command feel ironclad. "This clan moves with precision. You will not interfere with business. You will not ask questions. You are safe here, because I protect what's mine." His eyes, dark and unreadable, held mine, daring me to challenge the mine. His protection felt less like a shield and more like a carefully controlled atmosphere designed to suffocate my stubborn spirit. That evening, before locking the door from the outside, he returned with a heavy, silver bracelet. It looked like jewelry, a thick, expensive cuff, but the weight was all wrong. "This is a tracker, military grade," he explained, his fingers cool against my skin as he locked it around my wrist. The click echoed in the silence of the room. "You are now visible to the entire security network. Do not attempt to remove it. You are a prize, and prizes are guarded." He didn't offer comfort. He offered control, the only language he knew. I lay on the silk sheets, the heavy silver biting into my wrist, feeling utterly alone, a prisoner of a debt I hadn't incurred. Just as the suffocating silence of the Ice King's fortress began to crush me, the burner phone they'd given me buzzed. It was a text. Unofficial. Reckless. It was from Hyun-woo. "Missing me yet, nurse? Don't worry. The Ice King keeps you frozen, but the wildfire will be melting you next. I'll show you what freedom looks like." I stared at the screen, the image of his fierce eyes and chaotic smile flashing in my mind, a complete, vibrant contrast to the cold room. My heart hammered. A trapped bird, suddenly fluttering, not just in fear, but in anticipation. Hyun-woo was a terrifying danger, but in that sterile silence, his message felt like the only warm, human thing left. He was the promise of a glorious crash. And in the oppressive darkness of Ryu's claim, I found myself waiting for the fire. The transfer was executed with military precision. Ryu's guards, clad in sharp black suits, handed me over to Hyun-woo's men, who wore loud Versace shirts beneath their blazers. It was a trade of goods, not a passenger transfer. I was the prize being moved from the icebox to the forge. I looked back at Ryu's minimalist, concrete compound, a prison designed for silent survival, and then ahead to the high-rise penthouse in Seoul, which was already blazing with neon. This place was a cage designed for chaos. Hyun-woo's world was noise. The penthouse, high above the frantic lights of Gangnam, smelled of expensive leather, cigar smoke, and danger. Music thumped somewhere in the distance. Servants glided through the space, But unlike Ryu's silent guards, Hyun-woo's crew laughed, drank, and talked loudly in rapid Korean. I felt intensely visible, a black woman navigating a sea of Korean power and opulence. "You look like you're waiting for a funeral, Jagi," Hyun-woo said, spinning around from the bar. He wore a deep burgundy silk shirt, open just enough to show the black tiger tattoo coiling over his pectoral muscle. He was the opposite of Ryu's controlled stillness. Every movement he made was wild, reckless, and compelling. "You're in Seoul now. You're supposed to look free." He wasn't asking. He was commanding. Within an hour, he had dragged me out of the penthouse and into the street, forcing me to sit on the back of his massive, roaring motorcycle. I clung to his leather jacket, the vibration thrumming through my bones. He took me to an underground club, not to hide, but to show me off. He was deliberately exposing me, making me a target, just to prove his ownership. "Look at her," he'd loudly declare to his associates, his arms cinching around my waist, pulling me tight against his side. "She saved me. She belongs to the Choi blood now." Every touch was a public announcement, a brazen finger in the eye of the Yakuza. Ryu had guarded me with silence and surveillance. Hyun-woo claimed me with noise and constant tactile possession. That night, at a private dinner where the tension was so thick I could barely swallow, his hand never left my lower back. When I tried to pull away to ask a question, he simply tilted my chin up with his thumb, forcing my gaze to meet his. It wasn't gentle. It was a claim. "I saved your life, Hyun-woo," I finally spat out, shrugging his touch off my shoulder when we got back to the penthouse. I was furious at being paraded around like an exotic pet. "I'm not a toy you two pass back and forth for territorial bragging rights." He didn't get angry. He grinned, a feral, confident flash of teeth. "Not a toy, Zara. A queen. A war prize. And you just don't know it yet." The next moment was a blur of heat and hunger. He didn't ask permission. He didn't wait. His hands cupped my face, and his mouth devoured mine, sudden, demanding, and utterly overwhelming. It was nothing like Ryu's cold, controlled precision. Hyun-woo's kiss was a storm, raw and primal, tasting of scotch and recklessness. It was fire, and for one terrifying, shameful second, I burned right back, my breath hitching in my throat as my hands instinctively curled into the silk of his shirt. I shoved him away, fury mixing violently with the confusing, unwelcome adrenaline that surged through me. My lips were tingling, my composure shredded. "Don't ever do that again," I whispered, shaking. He chuckled, the sound low and dangerous. "I will, and you'll let me." The next morning, I was back in Ryu's black SUV, crossing the border of his compound. As I was led inside, Ryu was waiting in the silent marble hall. He looked at me, cold and assessing, and his eyes immediately dropped to my neck, where the faint, angry red mark of Hyun-woo's fervent claim was barely visible beneath the collar of my silk shirt. His face remained an unreadable mask, but the air around him dropped 10 degrees. The Ice King went dangerously still. "Did he touch you?" he asked, his voice low enough to be a death threat, but not loud enough for the guards to hear. The question wasn't about the kiss. It was about the line of control, the line Hyun-woo had just crossed. I couldn't answer. I was too terrified of the storm brewing in his dark eyes, and too shaken by the sickening realization that I was utterly captivated by the thought of them fighting over me. My body still remembered the heat of the fire, and now the ice was demanding its turn. I know I should hate them. They've stolen my life and turned me into a weapon in their endless war. But why did my heart jump when Hyun-woo grabbed me? Why am I terrified, yet slightly hopeful, of what Ryu will do next? Tell me, if you were Zara, would you let Ryu's jealousy consume you, or would you use it to survive? Also, if you're not subscribed yet, you're missing out on the next piece of this blood debt. If this story disappears because you didn't click that button, you'll never find out who I choose. Don't let my story die. Show Ryu and Hyun-woo that I'm worth fighting for. Hit subscribe. Zara felt the phantom sting of Hyun-woo's kiss like a physical bruise on her neck. It was more than just a kiss. It was a mark, a loud declaration of ownership delivered directly to Ryu's territory. She had rushed through the gates of the Japanese compound, the minimalist fortress feeling less like a safe house and more like the cell of a furious jailer. Ryu was waiting. He was standing in his private study, the room dominated by dark wood and an almost oppressive silence. He wore a traditional dark blue kimono over his muscular frame, and the crimson dragon tattoo peeked over the collar, moving slightly as his chest rose and fell. His eyes, usually cold and perfectly flat, held a dangerous spark she hadn't seen before. "Take a seat, Zara-san," he commanded, his voice utterly devoid of inflection. He did not offer tea or a friendly inquiry about her stay with his Korean rival. There was only the thick, suffocating tension that coiled between them. Heavier than any physical threat, Zara remained standing, stubbornly folding her arms. "I'm not a child you can summon. If you have questions about Hyun-woo's operation, ask him." "The only thing I need to ask you about is loyalty," Ryu said, taking a single slow step toward her. His movement was fluid, lethal, like a glacier shifting. "When you are in my house, under the protection of the Nakamura Gumi, you belong to me, not him." "I don't belong to anyone," Zara shot back, but the lie felt brittle even to her own ears. The truth was, every time Hyun-woo's hand landed on her lower back, or every time Ryu's silent gaze tracked her movements, she felt the invisible chains tighten. Ryu's jaw tightened, and the muscle jumping in his cheek was the only sign of the control he was fighting to maintain. "Hyun-woo is volatile, reckless. He treats our arrangement like a game. I am the one who ensures you survive the week." "And you think that's devotion?" she challenged, her voice trembling slightly. "Surveillance and control? Is that how you repay a debt?" He closed the remaining distance between them, trapping her between his powerful form and the mahogany desk. The air crackled with suppressed violence and something else, a silent, possessive fire that belied his Ice King persona. He reached out and gently brushed the skin on her neck where Hyun-woo's kiss had lingered. His touch was cold, contrasting sharply with the memory of the Korean's blazing heat. "You misunderstand the nature of my claim," Ryu murmured, his voice dropping to a low, seductive rasp. "Hyun-woo claims you with noise. I claim you with permanence." Then his mouth was on hers. It was nothing like Hyun-woo's devouring, reckless kiss. Ryu's was calculated, deliberate, and devastatingly slow. It was a methodical invasion, not of passion, but of sheer, unyielding possession. He tasted like cold green tea and untold power. His hand cupped her cheek, tilting her head, demanding her full, absolute surrender to his will. She fought the need to sink into it, fighting the terrible, confusing urge to let this cold dominance wash away the chaos Hyun-woo had stirred in her. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were black, heavy with satisfaction. "I don't share, Zara-san, but for the sake of the blood debt, I made an exception. Once, never mistake the silence for weakness. You are mine here." He stepped away, leaving her gasping, reeling, feeling utterly exposed. She was terrified of what both men were doing to her life, yet a dark, buried part of her heart yearned for the return of that possessive, calculated pressure. She hated that she craved the security of Ryu's control just as much as she craved the reckless fire of Hyun-woo's touch. She had been a good woman, a nurse, a saver of lives. What was wrong with her? The initial suffocating terror of being claimed had calcified into a kind of bizarre, uneasy routine. Zara no longer jumped at the sound of the steel door closing behind her at Ryu's compound, nor did she flinch when Hyun-woo's hand suddenly appeared on the back of her chair during a tense meeting at his penthouse. Weeks blurred together in a dizzying rotation between two opposing worlds. She was a single planet in a binary star system, pulled by two forces that promised either stability or destruction, depending on which side of the city she woke up on. She began to understand that their obsession, like everything else about them, operated on strictly contrasting frequencies. Ryu, the Ice King, spoke a language of silent surveillance and calculated perfection. When she woke with a searing migraine after a sleepless night, she didn't have to ask. An unmarked box of prescription-strength meds from her favorite Osaka pharmacy would simply appear on her bedside table, accompanied by a rare, exotic fruit tea she had once casually mentioned liking. It was protection without pretense. Once, during a chaotic transfer between compounds, a rival gang member had shouted a racial slur at her from a passing car. Before Zara could process the insult, the car had been boxed in by 2 black Yakuza sedans and silently vanished. Ryu never mentioned it. He just stood there, his crimson dragon tattoo stark against his pristine white shirt, a quiet demonstration of absolute dominance. His touch was rare but lethal, a firm hand steadying her in a crowded room, a thumb brushing her wrist before he withdrew, leaving a lingering heat that felt more like a brand than comfort. Then there was Hyun-woo, the Wildfire, whose love language was explosive, public, and utterly reckless. He dealt in grand gestures, not quiet comforts. He'd show up at Ryu's compound in a low-slung Italian sports car just to drag her out, presenting her with extravagant gifts, a necklace of black pearls, a couture dress for a private club outing. He wrote notes in broken, passionate English, stuffing them into the pockets of her borrowed jackets. "You are the storm I can't weather, Jagi." He made sure everyone knew she was his. He'd pull her onto his lap during meetings with his lieutenants, teaching her how to hold the silver-plated handgun he kept locked away, his rough hands guiding hers at the private shooting range. Their intimacy reflected their personalities. Hyun-woo was demanding, consuming, focused on raw, untamed passion that left her breathless and bruised the next morning. It was a chaotic, brilliant fire that left her feeling both prized and utterly exposed. Zara found herself navigating this dual rhythm with a terrifying competence. She was the one who could interpret the twitch in Ryu's jaw as barely contained jealousy, and she was the one who knew the deep-seated vulnerability hidden behind Hyun-woo's confident smirk. She was falling for both, differently, desperately. She craved Ryu's quiet, lethal shelter against the world, and she yearned for Hyun-woo's intense, consuming desire that made her feel alive. The guilt was a physical ache. How could she, a trauma nurse committed to healing, be falling for 2 men who embodied everything broken and dangerous? She knew this dual obsession was an unstable equilibrium, a territory map drawn with a matchstick. The precarious balance shattered one Tuesday evening. Zara was on the phone with her sister, a call that was always monitored but provided a fragile tether to her old life when the line suddenly cut out. A massive metallic groan shook Ryu's compound, followed by the distant but unmistakable sound of an explosion. The walls vibrated, and the lights flickered violently. A guard burst into the room, his face pale beneath his mask. "Oyabun! We intercepted it! It was a car bomb! Meant for the gate!" Meant for the gate. The place where she had just been scheduled for her transfer to Hyun-woo's territory. Both men were now fighting the same enemy, but they had just realized something terrifying. Zara was no longer just the prize in their war. She was the target. Her breath caught in her throat. She wasn't collateral damage. She was the bullseye. She looked down at her hands, still shaking from the tremor. She was alive, but the world was closing in, and she knew, with cold certainty, that the next attack would be closer. Would Ryu and Hyun-woo's blood feud finally consume them all to protect her? Or would her presence destroy both clans? The flash of the explosion had been blinding, followed by a shockwave that rattled the steel-reinforced glass of Ryu's fortress. Zara had been thrown across the minimalist living room, hitting the cold marble floor as alarms screamed through the Japanese compound. The car bomb, meant for her, had detonated just outside the inner perimeter, close enough to leave a smoking crater and shattered nerves. In the aftermath, the usual tension between Ryu's silent, watchful guards and Hyun-woo's louder, more volatile crew dissolved into a shared, lethal focus. The attempt on her life was the one thing that could cut through the thick air of their rivalry. They both understood the message. Zara Thompson was not just a prize, she was a liability. And the only way to protect their shared asset was to temporarily share power. The neutral ground chosen was a high-rise safe house in an unnamed coastal city, a space where the Nakamura-gumi and the Choi faction had no historical claim. It felt less like a home and more like a tactical operations center. Ryu was there first, his crimson dragon tattoo stark against his white shirt, his movements precise and economical as he reviewed surveillance feeds. When Hyun-woo arrived, his entrance was a burst of energy, the Korean underboss immediately demanding answers, his voice a low, furious rumble. Zara watched them from the kitchen doorway, two deadly sovereigns forced to stand on the same narrow patch of land. They didn't look at each other, only speaking through clipped, hostile commands and tactical jargon. Ryu was the meticulous one, drawing up security protocols, assigning watch rotations with detached efficiency. Hyun-woo was the predator, snarling about retaliation, already listing names of suspects. The hatred was a living thing between them, yet it was subservient to the need for her survival. She moved to the center of the room, her voice shaking but firm. "You want to know who tried to kill me? Ask me what I know. I'm the target, not a piece of furniture." Hyun-woo turned instantly, his expression softening from rage to something dangerously tender. He pulled her against his chest, the scent of expensive cologne and gun oil filling her senses. "Jaggy," he murmured, his hands tight on her back. "We know you didn't ask for this, but the world sees you as a weakness we share. Anyone who wants to destabilize Tokyo and Seoul will come for you." Before she could speak, Ryu's hand, cold as ice, settled heavily on her shoulder, a silent claim cutting through Hyun-woo's embrace. He didn't try to pull her away, simply asserting his presence. "We are forced to cooperate to save our own interests," Ryu stated, his eyes boring into hers. "Your life is now the tether between two empires. We will find who did this, and we will eliminate them. Until then, you are under joint command." The electric, suffocating moment, Hyun-woo's wild heart beating against her ear, Ryu's heavy, possessive hand on her shoulder, was almost more terrifying than the bomb itself. She was safe, yes, but she was trapped between two opposing gravitational fields, both pulling her apart, both keeping her alive. Later that night, the safe house was quiet. Zara lay in her guarded room, unable to sleep. She heard the low murmur of their voices down the hall, too low to make out words. But the tone was unmistakable, intense, grudging, and utterly focused on the danger. She crept to the door and pressed her ear against the cool wood, catching a few broken sentences. "Too exposed here." That was Ryu, his tone flat, pragmatic. "If she stays, she dies." A beat of silence. Then Hyun-woo's rougher, more passionate voice sliced through the tension. "If she leaves, we hunt her forever. There's no out. We keep her, we hide her. She will never be safe from the debt we owe her. Never be safe." The words hung in the darkness, twisting the already fractured hope in her chest. She wasn't just a prisoner of their obsession. She was a prisoner of the impossible reality they had created for her. They were killers, yet they were risking a total gang war to protect her. And now, she knew the terrifying truth. There was no exit. The safe house had become a gilded cage, not because the locks were stronger, but because the men guarding them were now interwoven with her heart. Zara walked the polished floorboards like a ghost, every silent step amplifying the deafening conflict inside her. Weeks had passed since the car bomb forced Ryu and Hyun-woo into their uneasy truce, and the forced proximity was destroying her carefully constructed walls. She didn't want to admit it, but the terrifying truth was undeniable. She was addicted to the two warring kings. She craved Ryu's quiet dominance. It was in the way he stood still, solid, an obsidian mountain of control. When he was near, the chaos of the outside world, the rival gangs, the police, the moral judgment, vanished. She was simply his responsibility, and that silent, absolute claim felt like the only stability she had left. His love was a heavy, inescapable anchor. It protected her through control, wrapping her in surveillance and silence. She could be reckless with her mouth, stubborn with her defiance, but one cold, assessing look from him, and the nurse who saved lives became the woman who craved the protection of a killer. Then there was Hyun-woo's fire. He made her feel alive, not just protected. His presence was a storm, loud, electric, and utterly captivating. He touched her with a bold recklessness that dared the world to look. When they were alone, the way he would pull her onto his lap, his hand, a branding iron on her hip, spoke a language of raw, consuming passion. Loving him was a betrayal of everything she believed in, a furious, shameful addiction to the thrill and the danger. He was the wildfire, and she was the thing that longed to be burned. The guilt was a constant acid in her stomach. They are murderers. They run empires of suffering. You are a trauma nurse. Yet when Hyun-woo brought her spicy, authentic Korean food and joked about her American temper, or when Ryu silently replaced her torn Bible with a leather-bound one in Japanese, she forgot. She forgot her moral compass and surrendered to the deep, confusing truth. She loved them both, but the way she loved them was fundamentally incompatible. She loved Ryu for the man he should have been, her steady sanctuary. She loved Hyun-woo for the man he was, her dangerous, reckless passion. The strain became suffocating. Zara began avoiding them, barricading herself in her room under the pretense of reading. Ryu, methodical in his obsession, noticed the shift in her rhythm instantly. His control started to fray, manifesting as longer, more tense periods of silence. Hyun-woo, fueled by impulsive emotion, grew overtly volatile. He stopped smiling, his loud conversations with his men becoming sharp, frustrated explosions in Korean that rattled the whole house. The fragile truce they had forged to protect her was tearing itself apart because of the war she had started, not with rival gangs, but inside her own heart. She was the wedge. She was the reason two powerful men were teetering on the edge of renewed, lethal conflict. The only way to stop the war outside, the war between them, the war inside her, was to remove the prize. There was no negotiation left, no choice. She couldn't keep sacrificing her soul to stay safe. She couldn't watch them tear each other apart for her. She had to break the debt herself, even if it meant death. She packed the smallest bag she could manage, tucked a stolen cell phone into the silk lining of her jacket, and walked to the window. The safe house was high, but there was a service ladder she had noticed during a late-night patrol. She had one chance before the dawnlight hit the city. She was going to run. At dawn, Zara Thompson would disappear, and neither the Ice King nor the Wildfire would ever find their war prize again. Do you think Zara made the right decision? Running into the streets of Tokyo without protection and with both the Yakuza and the Korean Mafia hunting her is incredibly dangerous. Tell me what you think in the comments below and hit the subscribe button. The digital clock on the bedside table read 4:30. An hour until dawn. An hour until the guards shifted. An hour until her window of impossible opportunity closed. Zara had rehearsed the steps a dozen times. The silent unlocking of the safe house door, the padded slippers on the marble floor, the subtle shift of the window lock in the utility room, and the 50-foot drop to the alley pavement. She had calculated the risk. Certain death if she stayed, maybe survival if she ran. She chose the latter. Her body was wired with a desperate, frantic energy, overriding the crushing weight of the last few weeks. The guilt, the confusion, the terrible, consuming passion for the two men who had destroyed her life and saved her soul, it was all too much. She just needed out. She gripped the small duffel bag, a meager collection of cash, a phone with a burner SIM, and her expired passport, and crept toward the door. The soundproofing in this neutral safe house was immaculate. Yet every beat of her own heart felt like a drum roll echoing down the silent hall. She reached for the brass handle, her fingers trembling, when a soft voice, dangerously low, cut through the quiet. "Going somewhere, Jagi?" Zara froze. Hyun-woo was lounging against the wall 10 feet away, a ghost in the pre-dawn gloom. He wasn't wearing a suit, just dark trousers and a tight-fitting black shirt that showcased the tiger tattoo coiling over his shoulder. He looked less like a mafia boss and more like a predator who had just spotted his escaping prey. Before she could speak, the steel door at the end of the hall hissed open and Ryu stepped out. He was fully dressed, immaculate even at this hour, his face unreadable but his eyes burning with lethal certainty. The Ice King and the Wildfire, 2 watchdogs guarding their prize, waiting for her exact moment of weakness. "You think we'd let you go?" Ryu's voice was pure, refined ice, striking her harder than any shout. "After everything, you'd just leave?" Hyun-woo moved, closing the distance between them, his movement fluid and menacing. He snatched the duffel bag from her hand, tossing it aside without a glance. Her carefully constructed facade of control shattered. The exhaustion, the terror, the love she couldn't choose between it all erupted. "I can't do this!" She screamed, the sound muffled by the thick carpet, but raw with anguish. "I can't love you both. You hate each other. This will destroy me. I'm not a bridge. I'm the wreckage you fight over." The confession hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. The 2 men went utterly still, their rivalry momentarily suspended by the sheer force of her breakdown. Then, Ryu moved first. He walked directly to her, ignoring Hyun-woo entirely, and cupped her face in his cold, gentle hands. His thumb brushed a tear from her cheek. "You think this is about our debt, Zara? You think we still see you as payment?" His voice dropped to a rough whisper. "You don't owe us your life anymore." Hyun-woo stepped up behind her, his large hands settling heavily on her shoulders, anchoring her in place. His heat was a stark contrast to Ryu's coolness, but the claim was unified. "The debt is paid," he murmured into her hair, his accent thick with emotion. "It's paid because we're still breathing. But you stay because you choose to, because you're ours, both of ours." Ryu looked directly into her soul, his command absolute. "The debt is paid. You're not our prize. You're our equal. But you belong here. You belong to us." They weren't asking her to choose one of them. They were demanding she accept them both. She was trembling, caught between the Ice King in front and the Wildfire behind, their unified resolve crushing her last defenses. She looked from Ryu's intense eyes to Hyun-woo's demanding grip. "And if I say yes?" she whispered, her voice barely a thread. Ryu leaned closer, his breath cool on her skin. "Then, my queen," he said, the title echoing with a promise of power and protection, "we end this war, together." The blood debt had been repaid not in servitude, but in sacrifice. 5 years. 5 years since that terrifying, liberating moment in the library when Ryu and Hyun-woo had cornered me, not to punish my escape attempt, but to hand me the keys to their kingdoms. They hadn't wanted a prize, they'd wanted a bridge. And I had spent half a decade building it. The merger of the Nakamura-gumi and the Choi faction, an event the press dubbed the Black Lily Alliance, had been an unprecedented shockwave through the global underworld. There were whispers, of course, rumors of a black woman who had somehow tamed the 2 most dangerous men in Asia, who reigned over Tokyo and Seoul with equal authority. They didn't know the reality. I governed through sheer exhaustion, equal parts love and fury, and the constant, unnerving awareness that my continued existence was the only thing preventing a civil war. Today, the scent of fresh-cut grass and rain-washed cedar filled the air of the Tokyo compound, a deliberate blend of Japanese serenity and Korean vibrant green. I stood on the veranda, sipping my tea Ryu's special blend, of course, and watched the culmination of our strange, dangerous love. 2 children played in the manicured Zen garden. The eldest, a boy of 4, moved with his father, Ryu's quiet, methodical intensity. He carefully stacked polished stones, his gaze fixed, his dark eyes assessing the world with a silence that made my heart ache with recognition. The younger one, a girl with Hyun-woo's wild grin and my rich, deep brown skin, was currently chasing a terrified garden snake, her laughter a reckless, consuming sound that echoed off the high walls. A pair of hands settled on my waist. Ryu, the Ice King, stood behind me, his solid, unyielding presence a promise of stability and control. His chin rested on my shoulder as he watched his son. "He gets his focus from you," Ryu murmured, his voice the low, perfect rumble that always settled the chaos in my mind. "He gets his silence from you," I countered, leaning back into his strength. A moment later, Hyun-woo, the Wildfire, strode onto the veranda, smelling of clean leather and adrenaline, having just returned from a volatile meeting in Shinjuku. He threw his arm around my shoulders, his energy immediate and demanding, claiming the other half of my attention. "Look at them," he said, his voice loud and proud, eyes alight as he watched our daughter terrorize the fauna. The future, half Japanese, half Korean, all theirs. The end of the war is running in that garden. I was the seam that held them together. The blood debt had been the catalyst, forcing me into this impossible geometry. But the binding agent was the choice we'd all made, to accept the shared heart, the dual thrones, the strange, fierce love that demanded I be both protector and prize, woman and queen. As I looked from Ryu's protective stillness to Hyun-woo's radiant fire, I remembered the life I'd left behind, the sterile hospitals, the safe, predictable exhaustion. "They say I saved their lives," I whispered, pressing my hands over theirs where they rested on my body, an acknowledgement of their unending dual claim. "They gave me this empire in return." Hyun-woo kissed my temple, his breath warm. "The truth, Jagi?" Ryu finished the sentence, his voice cold and absolute. "You didn't pay a debt. You became the debt we can never escape." The warmth of their combined weight settled over me, two kings bound by the shared power of the woman they refused to let go. But the terror had long since been replaced by a fierce, proprietary love. But here's the thing. 5 years later, Zara has 2 kings and 2 children. But is she truly free? Or is she just in a bigger cage? The Ice King runs his empire on control. The Wildfire runs his on passion. And those 2 little children running in the garden, the heirs to 2 rival Mafia empires, will have to choose a side one day. Who do you think the boy will take after? Who will the girl obey? You need to tell me! Drop a comment right now. Will the next generation finally tear the alliance apart? Or will they make it stronger? And look, I've spent all this time detailing Zara's fate and this amazing, complicated life she built. If you enjoyed this ending, you owe it to Zara to finish her story. If you don't subscribe right now, you'll miss the exclusive short story epilogue that reveals the true loyalty of those 2 kids. And you will leave Zara's legacy hanging. The war may be over, but the reckoning was still coming. I was the bridge. But bridges can burn. And no one, not even Ryu and Hyun-woo, knew what would happen when my 2 boys finally had to choose which side of the river they truly belonged to. Subscribe and stay tuned for more.